Authentic.
Curated.
Woke. Unapologetically black.
Dope. Substantive.
Powerful.
Innovative.
Relevant. Global. Cultural.
Black excellence.
That's my KweliTV.
Our culture curated.
All right, this is the Brothaspeak Podcast, where we talk to the innovative, the daring, and the bold, providing informative topics for the Black LGBT. And I have a special guest today, and I'll be honest with you, I was very surprised when I discovered who created some of these films. I actually went on KweliTV not that long ago, and of course, those who don't know KweliTV is actually an interactive streaming platform that shares the African Diaspora experience through undiscovered documentaries, films, web shows, TV programs, children news, etc. And I'm a lover of history. I'm a big lover of history, and I came across this particular film, and it was called Ain't Nobody's Bizness, a Queer Blues Divas of the 1920s. And I was very much so educated. I did not know how far, we say LGBT now, but I'm pretty sure it was known as queer back then, in terms of how far reach and the influence that they had within the music industry at that particular time. And I was floored. I was really educated. I really enjoyed it. And I definitely want to make sure a lot of people were aware of that. So I had to reach out to the person who created this film, and I came across a guy named Robert Phillipson. And it was not what I expected. It wound up being a guy who actually is Jewish, but also who seemed to be a lover of the queer history that definitely seems to be put out there through his educational films, which is companies called Shoga Films. Am I correct in saying that? Shoga Films?
Yes.
Shoga Films. And it definitely on his platform, it creates and disseminates multimedia works on race and sexuality that raises awareness and foster critical discussion. And I got to be honest with you, I really enjoyed it, and I encourage everybody who definitely wants to learn more about the history, especially with queer history, to check out this film, Ain't Nobody's Bizness, Queer Blues Divas of the 1920s. How you doing, Mr. Philipson?
I'm fine, thank you, and thanks for having me on the show.
Thank you. You know, I looked at this and I'm thinking to myself, wow, this is some really good pieces of history that a lot of people probably don't know, probably didn't know at all. So I want to kind of swing the audience into, number one, how'd you get into this? What was your interest about it? And get people familiar with you and your work.
I've been making multimedia pieces, mostly documentaries and some music videos, focusing mostly on the Black LGBT experience. I used to teach literature, and my last teaching gig was at Santa Clara University in California. I'm based in Oakland, California. And I was teaching a course on the Harlem Renaissance. So being queer myself, my antenna's always up when I read about writers, critics, what we call influencers today, who are, who were gay or lesbian or bisexual. And I kept running into these tidbits during my research that this person was like Elaine Locke, who was the principal architect of the ideology of the New Negro during the Harlem Renaissance, was gay. Johnny Cullen, a well-known African-American poet, was gay. This wasn't being taught as part of the curriculum, so I thought this needs to get out there. When I transitioned into documentary filmmaking, this subject matter was natural for me. I was already pretty well versed in the history of the Harlem Renaissance. And so I started researching in greater depth the topics that I would approach. And the reason that the blues came up early in this is because the blues is one of the few places in American culture where alternative sexuality was not only talked about and forthright terms, but sometimes even celebrated. So that was extremely unusual. And as I was doing research, some of the top names of that period, notably Ma Rainey, Bessie Smith, Ethel Waters, and Alberta Hutter, proved to be either bisexual or just straight up lesbian. So that led into the making of queer blues divas of the 1920s.
Now, just to make a little bit that I learned from the film during this is almost like the rock and roll at that time period. Pretty much all those who were considered to be the outcast from the church at that time was actually brought into and kind of they made their way into the blues at that time. Is that correct?
It was a complicated scene. First of all, it was racially segregated, as everything was during that period. So it was popular among race and class. The blues was popular among the working class folks.
Okay.
It was scorned by the middle class, or what Du Bois called the talented tenth, and of course abhorred by the good church-going people.
Oh.
So that section of the population that loved the blues really loved the blues. In fact, one of the things that really propelled the early recording industry and made what became recording companies convinced that they could make money off of what was then called race music was one of the first recordings of blues by black blues singers by the name of Mamie Smith. And she recorded Crazy Blues in 1919 or something like that. It was quite early.
Yeah.
And it was huge. It was a big success. So from then on, some companies, most notably OK, Paramount, went out, found blues singers, and recorded them, and had a lot of success with that. But they were marketed as race records and were largely unknown to the white public.
So is it safe to say that the first wave of artists, a good portion of them were queer?
It's surprising how many of them were, but among the first string, the people that I mentioned were, it's surprising how many of the prominent names, the ones I picked off were, but there were a raft of second and third string artists who were straight. So I wouldn't say a majority, but among this first generation of blues divas, yeah, there were definitely some big names. But this was not, they certainly didn't advertise themselves as queer. This was not generally known about them, and it was not something that, with the exception of Gladys Bentley, and we can talk about her later, this was not something that they put forward. Being perceived as lesbian or a bull dyker, as they were known, from the slang, was potentially dangerous. Homosexuality was primarily viewed through the discourses of criminality or mental illness. Absolutely, there was not even a nascent gay liberation movement at the time. It was remarkable that there was as much of a space as there was during the Harlem Renaissance for a semi-public presence of same-sex activity, which got shut down during the 30s and 40s. But that was pretty much the exception. When mainstream culture took notice of homosexuality, it's either to lock them up or put them in mental institutions.
So during this particular time, and they really spoke differently in their music. I'm just curious, was it something when it comes to their lyrics that they actually wrote? Was it something that people didn't quite get until later through the years, later in life, or they kind of knew exactly where they were coming from at that time in their music?
Well, there there's actually kind of a robust tradition of dirty blues, and as an example, Ma Rainey had a hit with a song called "Shave 'Em Dry," and when you listen to the lyrics, you don't know what "Shave 'Em Dry" is referring to. You can't quite. It sounds nonsensical, but what "Shave 'Em Dry" referred to was penetration. Basically sudden penetration without any foreplay. Yeah, that sort of thing. There's a very famous song that a number of blues singers did called "My Handyman,"
Okay.
which you should listen to. And the lyrics go, he shakes my tree, he cleans my oven, he shakes the ashes, and it's just dripping with sexual innuendo. So, there was lots and lots of double entendres going on at the time.
Wow.
As far as veiled references to homosexuality, they weren't so veiled. The very fact that they were mentioned at all was exceptional.
Right.
And oftentimes the lyrics were humorous. There's a song called "Sissy Blues" that Ma Rainey recorded,
Yeah.
in which she talks about woke up this morning, a man was gone, a sissy shook that thing and took that man from home. So I don't have to tell you what "shake that thing" means.
Right.
And in fact, Ethel Waters had a big hit with that very song, with a song titled "Shake That Thing."
Gotcha.
That mainstream critics shook their heads and said, "This is the end of American culture as we know it."
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
now, when it came down to the popularity, now the popularity, it was pretty much, did it stay just within the working class color section, or did it eventually when did it actually eventually start to branch into other areas other than just considered to be black music at the time?
Bessie Smith was a real crossover hit. She was known to what we would now refer to as woke white people in New York, and she performed in New York. But Ma Rainey, for example, she never performed in New York.
Really?
No.
That's
No.
surprising. Okay.
Not really. I mean, the blues came up Mississippi River. The home of the blues was Mississippi River in Chicago.
Gotcha.
Didn't go east of that.
Now, definitely some of the names we already are aware of. We seem to be much more aware of Ma Rainey, especially during which Queen Latifah also on her HBO special made very popular, which she also received an award for. What are some other names that were mentioned that a lot of people just don't know?
Depends on how into blues and blues history members of your audience might be. Best known as Bessie Smith, as you mentioned. There was an HBO movie directed by the black queer director Dee Reese.
Yes.
And Alberta Hunter was well known in her day. Suffered something of an eclipse in the 50s, and then had a roaring comeback when she was in her 80s in New York, sang at the Knitting Factory. And I've been told that part of her comeback was lesbians who cheered her on, was part of her audience, and talked her up. So she was well known by the time she died. Ethel Waters had a huge career. She's got a star on Broadway. Sorry, not Broadway. Hollywood Boulevard, the Walk of Fame. She was a star both on Broadway and in Hollywood. To the extent that a black woman could be a star, she had some big roles.
Gotcha.
And so she was quite well known when she died. this is all ancient history at this point. You know, anybody who was singing during the 1920s, if they lived until the 1980s, were doing pretty well. And you know, how many years are we from that? 40, 50 years. So, you know, I don't know to what extent their reputations have remained.
Gotcha. Good. Well, you know, the thing about this, are you discovering, especially through films like yours and other films that are being pushed out there, that people are getting a little bit more educated and is crossing different generations in terms of understanding how far queer and LGBT people really made their mark in history?
I really can't speak for what the millennial generation.
Okay.
You know, I'm way beyond that.
Okay.
I can't speak for what they know and don't know. This knowledge, you know, has been out there in a piecemeal fashion
Okay.
for some time, but unless you have a special interest in researching it, I don't know that it's common knowledge. I mean, Say Nobody's Business came out in 2010, so it's been around for 7 years, and when you discovered it, this was all new to you, right?
Absolutely. But see, I'm also in the X generation, and I'm not.
Mm-hmm.
I'm probably, but millennials, they're right after me. I'm 41, but you know, the thing about it is that just being a lover of history and always knowing exactly just a little bit of this and a little bit of that in terms of
Mm-hmm.
queer history is something, or just history in general, is just something that I would think that these films, for those who are just wanting to know, is probably going a little bit further than what some people originally thought that their films or their music would go in terms of different generations and kind of keeping that alive. So I didn't know whether or not that you seem to be seeing your work crossing in different generations, like mine's and younger.
Well, I hope so. There really isn't that much out there that's promoting this knowledge. There's,
Right.
You know, there's the HBO film Bessie, which we've mentioned already, and there's my film. There was a feature film that came out in 1996 or 8 called Brother to Brother by the director Rodney Evans, which takes on the queer Harlem Renaissance as part of its subject matter. Other than that, I can't think of anything.
Wow. So it's still a lot of work to be done. Basically, it seems like not a whole lot of information or his history or documentaries are being pushed in regards to that. Is there a particular reason why?
No, I can't really speculate as to why there there hasn't been more documentaries made about this subject matter.
I mean, I would think only because the reason why I'm asking that is because I'm thinking if the queer community in itself is looking to push further to make in terms of the contribution to the world, that would probably be something that would be pushed or marketed.
Well, there's a lot of excavation to be done, and there's all kinds of historical characters that are being brought to light now. Just to keep it within the Black framework, there was a documentary about Bayard Rustin, Brother Outsider, other filmic representations of people who participated in the Stonewall riots. I mean, this stuff is coming to light. The Harlem Renaissance, I mean, that's my particular hoe that I'm rowing. I've been doing it for a number of years now, and as far as I know, and I've gone to a lot of film festivals, as far as I know, I'm still the only person working in this area.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, that says something very, very much about you. Now, how did you get into this particular segment of understanding or bringing out their queer history and that aspect? What made you become interested in this?
Well, I mean, the Harlem Renaissance was a fascinating period. It's really fun. And it's kind of the Black version of the Lost Generation. Paris in the 20s with Hemingway and Fitzgerald. You had these really talented people living these really interesting lifestyles. Everybody was having sex with everybody else. Everybody was gossiping about everybody else. And some people were producing masterpieces. Well, it was the same thing in the Harlem Renaissance, And it wasn't just literature. Theater, dance, it was visual arts. And it's just a really fun and fascinating period. So, I mean, the best part of the project has been the research. It's been great. In fact, I'm currently working on a full-length, feature-length documentary called Mood Lavender, which will take this all on, Queers in the Harlem Renaissance. And one of the things that, the thesis that has been around in academia, but I want to push it out into the world at large, is that queer sensibility wasn't just that queers participated in the Harlem Renaissance, because, you find an overrepresentation of queers in any artistic movement. But queer sensibility shaped the Harlem Renaissance.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely. Just to give you an example, the so-called dean of the Harlem Renaissance was a philosophy professor. He was philosophy professor at Howard University by the name of Alain Locke. And he was asked to edit an anthology of new writing that would present what was then called the Negro Renaissance to the public at large. He was very gay, and he was, he kept pursuing young men.
Okay.
He was somewhat older himself, and part of the way he framed that was through he's well versed in the classics. He was the first Rhodes Scholar, first Black Rhodes Scholar in American history. He'd spent time in Oxford in Germany, and studying the classics, and of course the classical ideal was the older man taking a younger man under his wing and buggering him in the process, and educating him so that the younger man would be a good citizen and a good artist. And he very much ascribed to this philosophy, in his pursuit of younger men and his attempted seduction of younger men. Sometimes successful, sometimes not. So when he was asked to present an overview of the Harlem Renaissance, he introduced a new idea, which was that of the younger generation. Nobody talked about blacks in terms of generational differences before. He was the first one to do it. And he was also the first one to say, the younger generation is the new Negro. This is where Negroes as agents, not as subjects. They're not sociological problems. They're not victims of history. They're artists and actors with full humanity and desires and abilities to express themselves. And he put that on the younger generation. It was very much coming directly out of his queer sensibility. That's just one example. There are many others as well. So it's really exciting for me to delve into this and to bring this forth.
Now, your work also, you have several films that a lot of people definitely want to make sure I showcase here. Let me just take you back. Of course, we talked about Tain't Nobody's Business, Take the Gay Train, The Blacks of Their Eyes, The Lives of Lamont Atkins, Body and Soul, American Bridge. And so it sounds like, how many years have you been doing this?
About a dozen years.
The true purpose of you doing it to really bring more attention to the Harlem Renaissance, and particularly the queer aspect?
No, I mean, that's really too narrow. I mean, some of the films have specifically dealt with the Harlem Renaissance.
Okay.
But the Lives of Lamont Atkins is about a contemporary guy who was a black yoga instructor who played football at Stanford, had a career as a performer, singer, model in Europe, and then came to San Francisco. Really struggled with his homosexuality, and finally came out when he came to San Francisco. So just followed his story. It was an interesting story. I wanted to document that.
Okay.
And
The Blacks of Their Eyes.
Oh Lord, we're going to open a can of worms here.
Well, that's what podcasts do.
Okay, The Blacks of Their Eyes. Okay. you know, people, identity politics is obviously important to any sort of discourse of ethnic reclamation or exploration. You know, who has the right to speak about what? You know, well, I'm a white guy or I'm a Jewish guy, and I'm making films about the black LGBT experience. Now, I'm queer myself, so I have that, but I don't have the black experience, at least not a subjective and lived experience. So, you know, that can cause people to raise an eyebrow. Why are you doing this? How can you present this in a way that is, that is fair, gives it its full humanity? Those are legitimate questions, and I must say I haven't been challenged as a documentary filmmaker doing films on these subjects very much. That's happened from time to time, but the end product speaks for themselves, and most people really like what I'm doing. The vast majority of people see that this is, you know, these are well-informed, well-executed documentaries. You know, how can you complain about that?
Of course.
But, you know, I've been challenged along the way to make a documentary that, you know, that reflects my own subjective experience. And so I made a documentary about white guys who are into black guys. And that's what the blacks of their eyes are about.
You know, it's kind of funny because I'm going to be having a conversation with a well-known adult entertainment director this coming weekend, because it's also to kind of talk a little bit, we're going to touch on it, I should say, on that particular subject as well. So no, is definitely going to, so, you know, it's a subject that a lot of us are much aware of, but it's definitely a subject that, honestly, it is discussed within the community, so why not discuss it and put it out there on the film? Now, you also say, take the gate train. What is that about?
Those are kind of like early attempts. So Mood Lavender is going to, as a documentary, it's going to incorporate adaptations of text, poem, experiences of black queers in the Harlem Renaissance, and put them on the screen. So I currently have a film on the film festival circuit, a short called Congo Cabaret. Congo Cabaret is an adaptation of a scene from a novel called Home to Harlem by Claude McKay that was published in 1928. It was actually the first bestseller that was written by a black author.
Oh, wow.
And Claude McKay is of Jamaican origin, but lived in the United States for about 20 years during that. And he wrote this novel. Because he's gay himself, he actually depicted some of the gay and lesbian subculture in the Harlem Renaissance in his novel. And most, specifically Congo Cabaret, which is owned by a masculine gay guy called Billy the Wolf. Wolf was Harlem slang for a masculine gay man at the time. So I adapted that. I hired a black queer directing, producing couple by the name of Quincy and DeAndre Gosfield in Hollywood to direct the piece as a short fiction film.
Okay.
They did a fantastic job of it. And that's going to be incorporated into Mood Lavender. Take the Gay Train is earlier adaptation of other pieces that I did myself.
Okay.
And it was doing those adaptations that I realized that directing films that require hair, makeup, scenery, working with actors, is just a whole different skill set than what I had as a documentary filmmaker, and one that you can't acquire overnight. So I just so it's out there, take the gay train, but hopefully nobody's ever going to see it.
Well, here's the thing. I mean, I definitely want my audience to definitely be aware of what information is out there and provide them at least that option to be able to check it out, at least to gain a sort of history that a lot of them really don't know. Again, not saying that everyone's a big history buff and kind of thirst for that like myself, but also and also you, because also you're putting yourself in developing the films to push that information out there. But it is to say that it provides an option. Now, when you put your films on KweliTV, how did that come about?
So there are a bunch of what they call video on demand platforms out there.
Yes.
KweliTV is one of them that's black oriented, but there are others as well. IndieFlix is one is gaining in prominence. At film festivals, the representatives will come to me and say we're interested in acquiring your film. And, so that's how that happened.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
definitely that was a good way. Since I'm also part of that as well, I could be able to at least look at the films that interest me, and that's one of the reasons why I definitely contacted you. I want to kind of make sure people are aware of this being out there. Now, right now, of course, Moon Lavender is one of the projects currently underway. Is there any other projects you have that's going to be? I think you already mentioned one already as well. Any other projects you plan on putting out there in the near future, next year or years to come?
Well, before I get into that, let me give a plug for Ain't Nobody's Business. If anybody wants to see it and they're not part of KweliTV, you can download it, rent it, or download it from Vimeo. And I think if you just put if you just Google the title, it'll take you to the download page. So it's easily available. If you want the DVD with bonus tracks of performances of some queer content, songs from the period, and videos based on those, you can order those from my website, which is shogafilms.com. So, so there are definitely ways of watching Ain't Nobody's Business.
Awesome.
In terms of what I'm working on, Mood Lavender is pretty all-consuming. It's a very ambitious project. It's going to be either 90 minutes or maybe even 2 hours.
Oh, wow.
All said and done. There's a lot of material there to cover. And, not only will I be making the film, but I'm going to have to raise money for it. And that's really the first time that I've set myself the goal of going out and raising some serious money for one of my films. So yet another learning curve.
Listen, if we don't put ourselves out there, we'll never really learn, And don't get me wrong, I've also had previous directors who've also put themselves out there in that way to gain support from the community in particular, just people who love art in itself. So I've had some directors do that, and some of them have some great success. So good luck with that aspect as well. And
Thank you.
So I definitely want to make sure people at least give the opportunity. And of course, I will be giving all of your information right under, directly underneath on the platform, I should say, on this particular podcast. So everybody can just simply take a mere click and just go directly to your information and go directly to your website to learn a little more about the films and also learn more about you and purchase if they wish to as well. So I definitely do appreciate you taking the time out to just talk to me for a little bit here about this film, because like I said, I love history, and this definitely kind of raised my eyebrow a little bit. So keep doing what you're doing and educating us more. I love what you're doing so far.
Thank you so much, Chris. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you and to get the message out there.
All right. Well, this is Chris from Brothaspeak Podcast signing off with Mr. Robert Phillipson. You guys have a wonderful day.
Okay, bye-bye.